Hey everybody, this is Jason, and I'm doing a response video, but as you can see I have a couple guests today. I'm a little bit scared, so you're going to have to bear with me as I get through this video. This is a contest response video for BOWMAN53 Alex. He's been on YouTube for 1 year, and he just was like, hey, let's do a video. Because he's into BOWMAN53, so it's a 50s based video. So you might be wondering why I have the Phantom of the Opera and the Mummy here. Well, you would be thinking, they're from the 30s, right? And you would be correct, they are from the 30s. However, if you are a film aficionado like myself and Alex, you would know that in the 50s, they had a revival in theaters and as well as on television of the Universal monster movies from the 30s. And then they started doing monster rally movies throughout the 40s and the early 50s of the Wolfman and Dracula and the Mummy and all those kind of things. And so I wanted to start off with showing a little bit of history of cinema because he wanted to do all things 50s. And I wanted to show a little bit of my collection and some of the things I collect or things I enjoy that are 50s based. And I think it's great because in today's world, 2019, so many people are connected in things such as, video games. Back in the 50s, there's no such thing as video games. You actually had to sit down face to face with somebody and play the video or play a game that way. There was maybe one TV in the entire house. More than likely, that it was the only TV, and it was a black and white TV, more than likely as well. On top of all that, you might have been the only person in your neighborhood with a TV, if your family was well enough to afford one. Having multiple TVs in your house did not become a thing until decades later. So everybody would sit around the TV like they would do in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, like they would do with the radio. They would all gather around and sit in front of the TV as a family and watch. They would play games together, which we're going to get into that here in a moment as well. But, we got video games now. We have technology. We can do everything on our phones. You can shop. You can bank. You can talk. You can message, send letters, which we call emails. You can do everything on phones. But think about the technology in, 50, 60 years now? About 60 years, I guess, now. Because my dad was born in 54, and he's 65 this year, my mom and dad. So there you go. So 60 plus years, how far we've come. So I just want to show, again, some of this. I kind of went off a little bit, but I think it's important to know that really understand how far we have come as a society and as technology and just, how we interact. And the things that were in the 50s and how different it was to how we are today. Like my son, he has no idea what a rotary phone is. He has no idea what a record player is. Like, he might understand it intellectually in his head. He's never seen it. He's never played with it. He's never put a needle on a record to hear a record play. He's never picked up a phone, connect it to a wall, and bring it to his ear and then dial the number on a rotary dial. He's never even had that experience. And so these are like little things that we would have done in the 50s. Though I wasn't born in the 50s, but it was a lot closer connection for us to understand that world compared to now in 2019. So with all that being said, that's my little PSA announcement. We'll get into it. So again, the Phantom and the Mummy. So, and he bids you adieu. So those are my first two for the 1950s for Alex. Next up, Godzilla. You gotta have a little bit of Japanese love here, right? Godzilla was 1954 from Japan, or as they would call it, Gojira. And it was their answer to the atomic bomb being dropped in Japan in nuclear war. And this was their response to that, was a radioactive monster. So I wanted to show a little bit of that action. So I have quite a few things I want to get to. Next up, the Frankenstein, and then Dracula. Again, we talked about this a moment ago, but I wanted to show some different ones. These are box sets from back in the olden days. It shows, I believe it has like 5 or 6 of their films on each one. And it just kind of shows you Well, right here it even tells you, so you all know I'm not lying. It shows you the 1951 reissue of the trailers. So it shows you they cut the trailers for a modern day audience in the 50s. So here we got Dracula. Here we got Dracula, and then Frankenstein from. This is also a little tidbit. His name is not Frankenstein. Frankenstein is the doctor, Dr. Frankenstein. This is Frankenstein's monster, right? So I just want to give people a heads up on that because a lot of people get that confused. And then last on the monster front is the Mummy. Boris Karloff was also the Mummy here, and then he also was Frankenstein. The same actor played both parts. A lot of people don't realize that, and a lot of people I think it's one of those things that kind of like gets lost on, especially modern day audiences. But he is the same actor who plays the Mummy, which is actually Imhotep, which I should have said that at the beginning. I'm sorry. He was a high priest, and then he was mummified, and his name in the Mummy is Imhotep. So a few other quick 50 type movies I think that are connected is this movie called The Barbarian and the Geisha. I actually introduced this to my son a couple weeks ago, and he actually liked it, I think. He thought it was okay. And this came out in 1958. So, and basically it's John Wayne, and it takes place supposed to be in the 1850s, 100 years prior, and it shows when they show up in Japan and basically said, we're going to establish a, post here now. Japan must open up to the West, and you now must let Americans come and trade with you and share your, your goods as well as us, and we'll share our military with you and vice versa. And that kind of like talks a little bit about that. That's not what this is about, but it gives you a brief synopsis of the film. Then we have Soul of the Game. Now I know that, Negro Leagues and baseball had lasted, well before the 50s, but it goes, I did some research to double check, and I believe the last game or the last year that Negro Leagues went was 1954. So they were going on through the early part of the 50s. And if you have not seen this movie, I highly recommend it. It's probably one of my favorite movies. It's, in my opinion, and again, I'm not as learned as some of the other guys in the community like Xavier and Aaron about the Negro Leagues, but I feel like it's a very good representation of what I understand to be the Negro Leagues and kind of their struggles and things of that sort. And I'm talking about basically when the Major League started like picking the best players out of the Negro Leagues and bringing them on to Major League Baseball. Next up is A League of Their Own. Again, kind of like with the Soul of the Game, you might be thinking, well, this is mostly 40s based, and you're right. A League of Their Own takes place as the girls' baseball, that took over, and that was mostly a 40s phenomenon. But they did play until 1951. So they had 2 years into the 50s that they played until they completely shut down the league. And if you all have not seen this movie, it is fantastic. I'm sure everybody who's watching my video right now and Alex's channel would know this movie, but it is one of my favorite baseball movies. Talking about another baseball movie that's really fun is The Perfect Game. Now this actually takes place in 1957. It's about a ragtag team of Mexican kids who end up being coached by a player named Caesar, or maybe Cesar, who was, I believe, like the St. Louis Cardinals, something to do with them, like maybe like I don't know. I don't know how much the movie is real to the actual reality of the player, but apparently he was like the equipment manager or something, and he kept being told he was promised that he would maybe actually manage the St. Louis Cardinals, and that never happened. They pretty much let him go, or they said they gave it to somebody else, and he got mad and left and went back to Monterrey, Mexico, where he's from. And he ends up taking these kids all the way to the 1957 World Series, a Little League World Series, and it's a story about that. It's a really fun, uplifting story. My son, again, enjoys this movie. It's kind of has some hokey, cheesy parts in a little bit, but I do enjoy it quite a bit, and it's a story that I never heard before, which is a true story. Again, I don't know how much of it's truly true, but it is a true story. Excuse me. Now, the reason I kind of talked about board games and sitting down and face to face with one another as an old timey way of getting to know and spend time with your friends or your family members, because you don't really do that anymore, was board games. Now, you might have thought I mentioned that in just in passing at the beginning of the video, but years ago I picked up a board game from the Goodwill, and because I want to buy games that I thought my son and I could play together that weren't going to break the bank, and if he didn't like it, I'm not stuck with a $20 game or $18 game or whatever. So I'd go to the Goodwill and buy a bunch of different board games. Some of them were hits and some of them were misses, as you would expect. But one that we still play today, he's 10 years old, going on 11. And we played this maybe just a month ago, even around a month before that, we played with his buddy. All three of us sat around together and played this game. And I just think it holds the test of time. And I did some research to make sure. It did come out in the 40s, but it didn't catch fire until the 50s. And I believe the game originally started in England. But the movie that goes along with this game came out in the 80s, but it takes place in the 50s. So it all comes together. And that game is Clue. That's right, everybody. The Clue board game. I just love this movie. I love this game tremendously. It's a game. I should not have to explain what that game is, but basically you have to figure out who the murderer is. You got to figure out who the murderer is, who did it, in what room, with what weapon. And I'm not getting into like how that game's played, because I think any of us who know anything about Clue would know that game. And that brings me to the movie Clue, which I've already done a discussion about this, so I'm not going to talk about it more than just say, hey, this takes place, I believe, in 1954, I believe. They talk a lot about communism and the Red Scare in the movie, so it gives you that vibe that a lot of these people could be up to no good because they're all like connected to Washington. And I don't know, that's just probably some plot points that they wanted to use, but it is a great movie with a fantastic cast. Definitely on the line of adult humor that kids can appreciate, if you know what I mean. But I highly recommend this movie as well. If you've never seen it, definitely go check it out. And last but certainly not least, I have a smattering of 50s cards. Some of these cards you've seen before, maybe some of them you have not. Some of them I've alluded to in the past. And so here we go, I believe. We have the 1954 Preacher Row card here. As you see, I love this. I feel like a pretty good looking card. The back is nice and clean. So you have that one. Then I believe this is 1956 Carl Erskine. So you have that Carl Erskine card. I think that's a beautiful card as well. I love this Erskine card. Again, the back is, I think, very clean. But you got Carl Erskine. Next up is 1957. Another Carl Erskine. Right there. And then we have Hank, I believe I pronounced his name Sauer. And I'm mispronouncing, I'm sorry, but I just love this. I got this out of a box I picked up at a flea market or something. I bought a box and then it was just sitting in there. I just thought it was, I know it plays, and I didn't even notice until recently it was New York Giants. So it wasn't the New York, San Francisco Giants, it was the New York Giants. And I just noticed that today, actually, while I was looking at it. Right there, New York Giants. And then this is the 1950, I think the rest of these cards are all 1959. So this came from Enough Said Cards Andrew. We got the Warren Spahn Sports Magazine 58 All-Star card, which is just a beauty of a card. And then we have the Carl Erskine, Pretty in Pink. Him and Molly Ringwald have a hot date. He's probably actually getting ready to go ask Molly if he sees her in the bleachers while he's working out. He's like, hey, Molly, would you like to go on a date with me? And she'll probably be like, oh, yes. Then we have the Yogi Berra. Now, this card has seen better days. But I got this at an auction, a local auction, just here in the farming community that I live in, for like a couple bucks. And, you know, the card actually is pretty sharp looking as far as the corners are concerned. The centering's way off, and there's like this stain at the bottom. But to get this card, and I know this is a couple dollar card, but to win it at an auction for a couple bucks, it being a Yogi Berra card, I think it was cool. You know, again, nothing's magical about the card. I just really enjoy it. But this is the cream of the crop, in my opinion. I've mentioned this before. I think I've showed it on a couple live streams before. This is probably one of my favorite cards. And I also got it at an auction around here. Is this Hank Aaron 1959 card. The color is really vibrant. The corners are fantastic. I think the centering is outstanding. The back's in pretty good shape. I mean, there's like some discoloration. I'm not gonna like front here, but you have that. But there you go. That's the 1959 Hank Aaron. So, everybody, thank you very much for. If you made it this long, you know I'm long-winded. If you made it this far, thank you. Hopefully, you all enjoyed the video. Make sure you please check out Alex's channel, BOWMAN53. He is a fantastic fella. I enjoy his friendship tremendously, and I look forward to seeing his collection grow, not just with the 53 Bowman as well as but with the autograph baseballs and just the production value of whatever he does. Even he'll do like a random Jimmy Rollins card or something, and I'm just like, wow, like he spent a lot of time on that Jimmy Rollins introductory card, and I think that's just awesome. So guys, definitely check out BOWMAN53 if you have not. Thanks for hanging around. And peace, love, and hair grease. Especially the 50s, you had greasers, right?